Hi guys, welcome to ProtoPilot. My name's Darren, and today we're going to be building a game right inside of ProtoPie. So the game we're going to be building is a game called Balloon Bonanza, and the idea of this game is to pop the balloon. But this game is going to be a little bit different to what you might expect, because we're not going to be using a touch interface to control this game. We're going to be using our voice, or more specifically sound. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's get into the computer and build this game. See you in a minute. Okay guys, welcome. So we're going to break down the building of this game into 4 steps. So the first step is going to be us building the start screen. Next up, we're going to be creating the balloon interface. In step 3, we're going to be creating the balloon pop action, so the point at which the balloon hits the needle and it pops. And finally, we're going to create a restart game sequence so that you can restart the game. Okay, so let's have a quick look around at let's just hide this off. So let's have a quick look around at the file. So if you're following along from ProtoPilot website, then you can download the source Pi file to get started. If you're following along on YouTube, then you don't get the file on YouTube, but you should be able to create the file yourself pretty easily. And I'm just going to step through what I did. So I've got a balloon pop audio file. So this is just a file I found on the internet that's a free, royalty-free. Make sure anything you download from the internet is royalty-free and free for you to use. So this is just a little pop audio file. And you just import that the same as you would any other media file. You can import it from this media menu here. Next up, we've got a group called screen.start. And inside of here, let me just hide all these other graphics. So screen start here has just got the welcome message. It's got a button just with a text field and a graphic, and it's just got an overall rectangle just to dim the screen, so like a blackout. Next up, we've got screen finish, and let me just bring the opacity up for that. So just a little message at the end. Congratulations, you popped the balloon, and a button to play again. So let's just turn that opacity on. You want to set that opacity to 0 by default. Next up, I've got my needle graphic. So this is very sharp. Don't touch the end. And this just is sitting at the top of the screen, and that's going to be the protagonist in our game, and it's going to be popping the balloon. Next up, we've got our balloon. So this is our balloon graphic. It's just made up. I've just drawn this in Sketch, and it's just made up of balloon type objects. It's got the balloon, it's got a little tie, and it's got a little string that just hangs off the bottom. So this is our character in our game. And finally, we've got the Big Bang. Well, not the Big Bang, I mean a bang. And let's just turn the opacity up here. So we've got this crazy, amazing bang graphic, and we can have some fun with this, but effectively we're just going to increase the opacity and just show this for a fraction of a second when the needle comes in contact with the balloon. So let's just turn that down, and we're just going to turn all these layers back on. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's add a tap trigger, and we're going to find our button.start. And to this, we're going to add an opacity. And we're going to select screen.start. So this opacity is effectively going to dim our start screen when we press the start button. So let's set the opacity to 0. Next up, we're going to add a move response. And this is going to be controlling the movement of our balloon, the ambient movement of our balloon. I just want the balloon to bob up and down, give it some life. Obviously, in the real world, a balloon wouldn't be just static, and we want to give some life to our game. So this is just going to give us set the stage, as it were, before the gamer starts to play the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose our balloon group, and we're going to move by 20 pixels on the Y. Okay, we're going to set the duration to 2 seconds, and we want this animation to repeat. We want this bobbing animation just to carry on happening until the user starts to play the game. So we're going to check this repeat option at the bottom here. And the repeat option gives you the ability to repeat the animation as many times as you want. I'm going to actually set this to repeat infinitely. I want the animation to carry on happening until the user engages with the game. And the only other thing I want to do is I want to change the interval to 2 seconds. So this is the time between each iteration of animation. Okay, that's looking good. I'm now going to duplicate this move because currently we're only moving it in one direction. We need to move it in the opposite direction to give that bobbing effect. And all I'm going to change is I'm going to add a minus to the Y here so we can move it back in the other direction. And I need to also delay the animation to make sure that the two animations don't clash, which effectively would mean that they would cancel each other out and there would be no movement. So I'm just going to add 2 here into the start delay. Okay. Next up, I'm going to add another response. I'm going to add a vibrate response because I want to add some haptics to the game, just to make the game experiences a bit more visceral. So you can add haptics fairly easily. There's haptics supported for both iOS and Android. I'm testing on an iOS device, so I'm going to change my haptic, and you've got a fair few haptics on iOS to play with. I'm going to use the heavy haptic. I want this to be felt quite strongly. If you're testing on an Android device, then you've got some options here. So feel free to test those out, find a good haptic that you think is going to work for you. Okay, so we're just going to name this trigger start because this is the beginning of our game. And we're now going to test on our device. So you can see here, I've got my device already connected. So the way you connect a device to ProtoPie is you can either connect via USB cable or you can connect over Wi-Fi. If you go into this menu here, you can see if you're going to connect over Wi-Fi, make sure that both your device and your computer is on the same Wi-Fi. And you can then either scan the QR code or you can type your IP address into player on your device. I'm connecting via USB, and either way you should see your device listed here and you should see this blue play button. Also, you can see that the actual icon is like this teal color as well, which also means we are connected. So if you're testing on device, you have to effectively send your prototype to the device, so you have to hit the run button. So let's just do that now. I'm going to come over to my device and I'm going to hit the start button. Okay, so you can see that the screen's disappeared and our balloon's just bobbing away, ready to go. Okay, so this completes the first section of building our game. In the next section, we're going to create the balloon interface. So that's the sound interface to actually move the balloon up the screen. So see you there. Okay, so now we're going to move on to step 2, which is to create the balloon interface. So by interface, I'm talking about the way you control the balloon. And in this game, the way we're going to control the balloon is by sound, so by our voice or by noise. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new trigger. We're going to add a sound trigger. And to that, we're going to add a condition. And we're going to select screen.start. And we're going to look for opacity. and we're going to look for when the opacity is set to 0. So we want the sound to start to register after the start screen has been pressed. So we're using the opacity of the start screen going to 0 as the trigger to trigger our sound interface. Okay, so next we're going to, inside of our condition, we're going to add a move trigger. And we're going to select our balloon. Okay, so when we add a move trigger when we add a move response inside of a sound trigger, you can see that we get a slightly different interface. So we've got this smoothness, which is just how we want the motion of the move to move the object based on the sound. So it could be moving quite erratically. We want it actually to be a nice smooth movement because it's a balloon. It's not going to have very hard movements. So we're just going to set the smoothness to the first option there. And we're going to set the range on this first side. So this is the decibel. So this is the amount of sound that's going to control the balloon. And you might want to play around with the range that you use. You ultimately have to have enough sound to move the balloon to the top of the screen. So it might be a bit of trial and error. These values work for me though, so you can certainly start with these. So I'm going to start at 70, and I'm going to set the other value to 90. Okay, so when we make some sound between these values, we want the balloon to move. So we want it to move on the y-axis because we're moving it up the screen. So I'm just going to plug in some values here. So we're going to start at 564, which is the position of our balloon at the bottom of the screen, and it's going to move all the way up to 0, which is the top of the screen. Okay, so that completes the control system for the movement of our sound. So let's just give that a bit of a test. We're going to have to make some noise, and hopefully this will work. Let's give it a go. So I'm just going to hit the start screen here, and we've got our balloon moving up and down. So I'm just going to make some noise. So you can see I'm just clapping, and you can see our balloons moving up and down the screen. Okay, well that's working. Not getting very far near to that needle, so might need to make some more noise. Okay, so that's a successful test. Okay, so next up, we're going to be moving on to step 3, where we're going to be creating the balloon popping action. So when it ultimately gets to that very sharp needle at the top of the screen, it's going to pop. So we're going to do that next. So see you there. Okay, so next up, we're going to create the balloon popping action. So this is the trigger that's going to actually create the explosion of the balloon when our balloon gets to that very sharp needle at the top of the screen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a detect trigger, and we're going to select our balloon. We want to detect the balloon's movement, and we want to detect its Y movement. So make sure you choose Y from the drop down list. Okay, so next up, we're going to add a condition. And again, we want to add this to the balloon. So we want to know when the Y is less or equal than. So you've got a bunch of different operators here. If you hover over, you can see you'll get a little tooltip letting you know what one is what. But you're looking for the one with the little back arrow and the line underneath, which means it's going to look for the value which is either equal to the value or less than the value. And the value we're going to look for is 112. And 112 is, if we just select the balloon here and we move it up to the screen, you can see as I get to the needle, if you glance over to the properties panel, you'll see the Y value is it's about 112 is what I worked out is when it's going to hit the balloon. Okay, going back to our condition. That's all set. Next up, we're going to add a response inside of our condition, which is going to be an opacity. And again, make sure the balloon is selected. And we're going to set the opacity to 0. And we're going to set the duration to 0.1. Okay, so when our balloon hits the needle, it's going to disappear very quickly. So when it pops, we want it to make a noise. And if you remember, we added a sound file to our ProtoPie file. So we're going to add a response called playback that allows us to play audio and video. In this case, it's going to be audio. And we're going to choose our balloon pop audio layer. And by default, the action is play, which is what we want in this case. We want it to play immediately when we pop the balloon. Okay. Next up, we're going to bring our explosion, our little bang. It's not the big bang that happened 15 billion years ago. We want to bring our little bang in, and we want to select that, and we want to add an opacity, and we want to bring the opacity up to 100, and we're going to set also the duration to 0.1. Okay, so our bang's going to appear and we want it to immediately disappear. So we're just going to duplicate this opacity and we're going to turn it all the way down to 0. And we're going to add a delay of 0.1. And you can see here in the timeline that the duration and delay has moved over. So we want this first opacity to run and finish before we fade it out. Otherwise, they're going to cancel each other out and you wouldn't see anything appearing. Finally, I want to add another haptic for when the balloon pops. So I'm going to add another Vibrate Response. And this time I'm going to leave it at the defaults, which is quite a heavy vibration haptic that happens on default. So that's going to feel quite good. So we're going to leave that there. And finally, when you pop the balloon, that's the end of the game. We want to bring in our finish screen. So we're going to add another opacity. And this time we're going to look for screen.finish. Choose that. And we're going to set its opacity to 100. So that's just going to overlay, like our start screen, over the top of the game. Okay, so let's just rename this balloon pop. And actually, we'll rename this one balloon control. Okay, time for a test. This is where hopefully we can have some fun, and we're going to try and pop this balloon. So let's give it a go. So I'm going to run this, and we're going to switch over to our device. I'm going to hit the start screen, and we're going to start making some noise. Let's see what happens. Well, there you go. That was easy. Probably need to change the values on the decibel. I did actually change it to a little bit of a shorter range. So actually, let's just go back and change the... Where are we? Yeah. So we changed this. I actually changed this previously off camera to 90 just because it wasn't working. But let's just reset that back to the original values. Let's run that and give that another go. Okay. Okay, maybe that needs to be a little bit more sensitive. So, and it's a case of just playing around with these values. Let's run that. Okay, so we can see actually that we're not seeing the pop. We're basically seeing the start screen way too early. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a delay on this screen.finish. So let's just delay that by a second, just so we get an opportunity to see the pop. So let's run that again. And just to make it a little bit easier to show you, I'm just going to change the sensitivity down. So I'm going to knock that back down to 80 to make the game a little bit easier. So let's run that and see what we've got. Okay, so there you go. You can see a lot better. You can see the balloon has popped. I don't think I had my sound up, so you didn't hear the pop action. Let me see. Or it might have come through on the recording, but hopefully you should be able to experience that for yourself. Okay, so that completes the creating of the balloon popping action. In the final section, we're just going to create a ability to restart the game. So we're going to create a restart screen. Okay, so in this final section, we're going to create the restart game screen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a tap trigger. We want that at the bottom of the screen. And we're going to choose button restart. So let's just look for that, button restart. And to that, we're going to add an opacity. And we're going to choose screen finish. And we want to set the screen finish is opacity to 0. So let's turn that down to 0. And we're going to leave the duration at 0.2. That's fine. And next up, we're going to add another opacity. And this time we're going to select the balloon. And we want to increase the balloon's opacity to 100. Obviously, when we pop the balloon, we effectively turn the opacity down to mimic the balloon popping. And we're just going to set the duration here at 0.1. Okay, so we want to go back. So we want to basically reset our game to the beginning again. So we want that ambient balloon movement, the bobbing up and down. So we're just going to copy our two move responses from the start trigger. And we're just going to paste them into this bottom tap trigger here. Okay, and finally, we need to reset our sound. So the way sounds work in ProtoPie is they don't automatically rewind back to the beginning. They'll just stop and the playhead will effectively sit at the end of the sound. So we need to reset the sound back to the beginning. To do that, we're going to add a playback response again. We're going to choose our sound. And we're going to choose the seek option, and we'll just leave that at the default. We want it to seek back to 0, which is the beginning of the audio clip. Okay, so let's just rename this restart game. And let's give this one final test. So we're going to run it on our device. We're going to press start. We're going to try and pop the balloon. So let's start making some noise. Pop. Oh, that was a good one. It kind of showed twice. I don't know why it did that. So congratulations, you popped the balloon. And then if we hit play again, we go back to the beginning again and we can start to have another go. Yes. Way too easy. I think we need to turn down the audio settings. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this video on building this very simple, amazing game, Balloon Bonanza. I think I'm going to have to get a developer and put it into the App Store. I think I'm going to make a whole ton of money on this game. Okay, a great party game. Take it to a party. I actually demoed this at one of the meetup groups before COVID and all that, when we had meetup groups where we actually met. And we demoed this. I demoed this at Channel 4 in a cinema at Channel 4, and we got everybody to shout as loud as they can. So it was a lot of fun, very, very interactive. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Take it easy.